Welcome back, Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brut. It's a pleasure to have you. We begin something new. Not that we are completely forgetting about Reb Chaim. We're going to get back to more of his svarim. But now we're going to focus on, we are learning currently the Seches Gittin, and Rabbi Brut wants to discuss controversies. Not one, not two, not three, I believe four different get controversies that have taken place over the centuries. And today we're going to begin with one that took place in the 1560s in Italy called the Tamari-Ventoruzzo get. Looking forward to hearing all about this. He's going to try to keep this short and sweet. People like when they hear controversy, just get to the action, cut to the chase. So we're going to try to do that, but obviously to understand it and appreciate it, you got to get the context. We are very grateful to our sponsor who is dedicating this episode as a zechus for Refuah Shalema, for our Victor Binyamin Ben Perel. From it, any learning and any Torah knowledge that comes out of this episode and perhaps inspires you to do more Torah learning should be a zechus for Shalema, again, for our Victor Binyamin Ben Perel from it. And once again, Rabbi Brut, if you stay tuned until the end, we'll turn around, spin his chair around, pull out a sefer from that pile, and introduce us to a sefer that occupies some space in that room of his. Rabbi Brut, how are you today?
Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem.
Okay, so where do we start and where are we going?
Okay, so we're going to try to make a little seder in this very complex controversy. This basically is a controversy we're going to learn that took place in the 1560s in Italy. It seemed to have rocked all of Italy, the rabbis, and everyone heard about it, as we'll see how they heard about it. And eventually it gets out. The Gedolim outside of Italy are also called in to offer their opinions, and some of the tshuvas also will be mentioned briefly in this discussion. It has many important ramifications, which we definitely will not be able to get into today, but we hope just to mention, to outline some of the different issues and some of the story, what happened. Okay, so basically, there's a story which takes place. A fellow gets married. He gets married. He offers kedushin to a girl, Tamari, actually, and her father was Yosef Haraifa Tamari, and his name is Shmuel Ventruzzo. Okay, these are the names of this is the cast of characters of the three people. Now, the girl Tamari is not really Tamari is not really discussed all that much. We don't really hear from her in the story exactly what happens, if she even says anything. Not there's a little bit mention about her in this whole story. Okay, fine. Now, so first, like this, there's a story. So now, before the story, we have to know is how do we know about this story? Because the story ends up in the 1560s, takes a lot of ink. Even in the 1560s, was written at the time immediately in live, so to speak. If we had internet of those days, this was the internet. As we're going to see, the story plays out. This is how, if there would have been an internet in those days, this is how it took place in those days, a controversy. So like this. First, I'm going to say the story, what happened, very briefly, and then we'll get back to different details as we go along. Okay, so first, the characters is as follows. We mentioned Yosef Tamari, he's the father. So he was born in 1520, and he's a doctor. He seems to be a wealthy person at least certain points in his life, and he's well connected. He's well connected with Jews, seems to be a prominent member in his community, and he has a daughter. His daughter is Tamar. Fine. Now, the chassan is Shmuel. It seems his father was a Rav. In some of the documents, it sounds like his father was Chassid, which is not used unless someone's extremely chashiv. From this story, it seems that Shmuel was a learned person. We even see that he had, comes up in the documents, he had Sifrei Kabbalah. So a youngster learning Kabbalah in those days, it seems like he was an educated fellow. And from this whole story, he's definitely not a pushover, because we're going to see that he publishes 3 svarim and different other materials to defend himself in this. What happens? Okay. Now, what happens is like this. In 1560, there's an Arison, and in order to, and we don't have to, we'll quote basically how he describes what happened. Who's he? Shmuel. and then we'll describe Shmuel. This is the person who's the main character, one of the two main characters. He puts out a book, and in the book, he's defending himself, so he writes out the story.
It might be worthwhile just giving a drop of background that Erisin is not what happens today.
Right?
Like
About to. Excellent. No, perfect. Right now, that's an excellent question. That is the first question that one must ask as soon as I read the next few lines, and you'll see exactly why what you just brought up is beyond important. Okay, so Bekitzer, it says like this: Chibur, in one of the first, it's a book that this Shmuel puts out where he's defending his side of the story, which we're about to see. He says what happens. So there was in 1560, Ani Shmuel HaKatan from Venezia. I had a shidduch with a girl named Tamar, her father of the daughter of the Reifer, Rabbi Yosef Tamari. Fine. So there was Venasu bein Chaisni uveini Shnei Shtaris bekinyan Sudar v'shvua ala nedunya misach sheish mois dukti umasayim b'malbushim v'tachshitim v'aitzeti l'shalish hashanim kaidim anasuin v'shana achas lachreim v'shar tnoim al signon achar echad kinahug v'nasam b'yad kol chelek mimenu echa mehem. So basically, it was a whole process with promises of money. Shtarais about this was given that he's going to be he's being meshadich with this girl, with kinyanim over here, which these are all important factors. And basically, fine. And this girl was a gedola at the time, also a very important point. It was midaita, says Shmuel, v'ritzaina, she wanted it. And he also v'gam nosati savloinus la rusasi. He gave her savloinus, which is a sugya relates to a well-known sugya in Kedushin. Okay, so now it seems like there was a full-fledged it's a full-fledged erison with money passing hands, shtaras, promises, and all these types of things. And what's significant is, in a later document that the Shmuel publishes, he adds in, it was done in front of a Yid Moshe Basala, Rav Moshe Basala. He was the kilu. It wasn't a kedushin, but he was the person that was watching all this going down, making sure the shtaris is all right and everything. Now, what's significant is there's no chasana happening yet. Now, and this is what's important about the story, because first there's no chasana, so what's the big deal? Someone backs out, so who cares? So and what happens is, a few months later, the father says he's not interested. He tells this guy, fly a kite. He's not interested in the next part of the process happening.
Perhaps you'll get to this, but the way you read over that document, there was one person who it happened in front of. Don't we need Adim to effectuate a proper condition? Depending what kind of it is?
So it sounds like, from the way it's described in with Rav Moshe Basalo in the later place, it was done properly with Adim, legitimate shtaris. No one's denying that this happened. There's no denial on both sides of the fight. This is not where the fight is. The question is, before we get anywhere, so first of all, point number one, the father-in-law basically says, I don't want him to be my son-in-law. The whole thing is goodbye, Charlie. Okay. So now, accordingly, that will mean is he needs a get. Why does he need a get? It's automatically assumed from all the literature, and that's what everything happens, is he doesn't want to give a get, and the father-in-law wants him to give a get. Why is it? What happened over here that requires a get? So this goes back to your question, which is at the heart of this topic. It seems not everyone did this, especially not at this time already, but originally, way back, when you learn Gemara, Daf Yomi Ksuvis Lamashal comes up more, is that there's the Nisuin, there's Erison, there's different steps. And some parts, there could have been a few, sometimes even years between different parts. So there's a Arus, a lady could be, there's an Erison, and then a Nisuin happens much later. So it seems like in Italy, one understanding of people that learn through these documents is that there was an erison, a full-fledged halachic erison, and in order for it to be abolished, it needs a get. That's one way how to understand this story. But you see, the main point of the story is the get. Everyone assumes he has a get, he needs a get, and what's going on with the get. That's what really the controversy is. This part of the story is no controversy, so there's no real clear thing. You just have to read between the lines what's happening. Another possibility is, I said he gave savloinus. So these presents, this also causes a great controversy in Masechtas Kedushin already, which is if someone's engaged to someone, then you give the savlonis, it might be already an act of Kedushin. Does it play out? So there is one academic that he seems to think that that's what triggered the story, but it's clear that that's not really what happened. It seems basically this was a case of an Erison, that she was engaged, but there was shtaras done in front of this gadol with money promised, money handed over, and all the different documentation. Okay, so this is the first step of the story. Fine. Now, so what happens? So basically, it sounds like he's not in the shver, even before anything happens. He's not interested in his future son-in-law. Fine. And basically, what happens is 4 years pass, and we don't know anything that's happening from 1560 till about 1564.
So what you're saying is, right now we have no idea if the reason why he doesn't want his son-in-law is because the son-in-law insulted him, because he's Meshuggah. We have no idea why at this point.
Right. So one thing we do know, it doesn't say, which does play out in other great controversies, the son-in-law being Meshuggah or something like that. No, that's not brought up at all. So that's also not. He just didn't. Maybe they had a disagreement. All of a sudden, fast forward to the years 1564, Maram Padua, the Gadol Hadar of Italy at the time, it's brought to his attention, the story, and he says he quotes a Gemara, a Mishnah / Gemara / Halacha, which basically it sounds like what happened over here is that the father-in-law claimed bankruptcy on some level, so he doesn't have money to do his thing, and then he wasn't already interested anymore. So there's a Gemara in Ksuvis Kufches Amabeis Kuftes Amad Aleph Apaisig Mois Lechaisna Upashala is a regel. So then the din is I kindness I putter. So basically is either you marry her or you give a get. So even though it's not his fault, it's not anyone's fault that the guy went bankrupt, but the halacha is you continue with the next step after Erison, and here the shver says he doesn't want it. It seems maybe the girl doesn't want it. We're also unclear about it. So the basic point was what should have happened. He has to give a get. So the Ram Padua says you have to give a get. If you do not in X amount of days, we're putting you in Chayrim. Okay. Now let's just understand the drop over here is that he doesn't listen to he's put in Chayrim, basically he doesn't listen. And now the story continues. Now you have to understand something. Stop for 1 second. The Chayrim in those days, Reuven Blumfeld, the historian of this Kufa of Italy, he even has some documents in his book of the Charam. It was a very, very serious thing. If you didn't listen to the Bezdin, you were put into Chayrim, and this caused the whole. It wasn't a pleasant experience, and it had halachic bearings. Relates back to Daf Yomi when we learned in my Katan a little bit about this. And it's interesting is that even in the 1560s, this was a powerful thing, and we know that it's even going on early after this controversy. Okay, so chayrim is a serious thing, and it's not a light thing. Oh, I'm putting chayrim, so who cares? No, it meant something. Fine. Now, government gave the power to the gedolim of the time, the rabbanim chayrim, so it even meant more than that. Fine. Anyway, both sides bring in the government. What does that mean? Both Yosef Tamari and Shmuel Venturzo have connections, and they're using, and Arkais gets involved over here and everything. And meanwhile, Gedalim are also getting involved. Fine. So this is we're talking about is 1564. Fine. Then the story gets further, which we'll continue with the story in a moment. Now let's just stop for a minute. And we have to understand, how do we know everything that even what I said? How do we know anything about this? The answer is like this. Sometimes there are controversies in that become famous and they remain famous forever. However they do. This controversy at that time rocked the world. And Italy in general, there was many different controversies that were going on. And now, but how do we know about them?
Maybe take 30 seconds, if I may ask you, to just give some background. What was going on in Italy in those days? People should understand. Italy wasn't just like some derful, with
I was going to say right now. Excellent. Yes, perfect. I'm going to bring that out right now as I'm explaining this, like this. So we have Italy. Italy is not, as you said, it's not this little shtetla. It's a bunch of cities, and each city had more Jews than others. Bunch of Rabbanim, a bunch of different people, Kihilos, Ashkenazi Jews, Sephardi Jews, and there was a lot happening. And through these documents, there must be 50 Rabbanim that are signing up on taking sides in this controversy. At least 50 Rabbanim. Some of them we know almost nothing about today. It's a unique situation, which is beyond the scope of today to understand why this is so, that there's so many Rabbanim in just like 5-6 cities. But anyway, so what happened is like this. There was 4 Svarim written about this controversy in those years. 3 were written by Shmuel Ventoruzzo, and 1 was written by Yosef Tamari. Each one is documenting and collecting the tshuvas of the Gedolim on to their side and to explain their side of the story from Bereshis Bara. Each one documents this. So when you read through these documents, you could start piecing together the things. The problem is these documents are very rare. So looking around, even in the late 1800s, there's no real discussion about this controversy because no one had these farms. They were very rare. And it turns out, if you learn chuvas, we're going to see there's a chuva, the Marshdam, 2 chuvas, the Mabit, the Verivais, the Ravaz. You don't even understand the chuvas, the context, because you don't have the svarim that they're referring to, which were these svarim that these both sides published about it. Anyway, recent years, I would say already starting from the 1960s, different academics, Isaac in the history of Italy in general, Lamashal, a fellow Shimon Simpson, and Reuven Bunfield, and fellow Dr. Zana, these people started piecing together all about Italy, and they tons and tons books and literature, and there's others academics also, and they start going through these documents very carefully, and they start to piece together the story. Then, like everything else, new discoveries come up, and comes along Yitzhak Yudelov makes this discovery, a guy Ephraim Kufaferg makes this discovery, and everything, like everything else, as time goes on, more and more discoveries. The Kair Gniza had some documents from the Red Vaz, from other people, other Gedolim of that time, and it starts showing after you start going through the different shuvas, the story starts getting more complex, and we're going to see some of the issues shortly. There's a Yid who is very Isaac Adayim, an expert in Hilchas Gittin, Rav Tzvi Gertner. He's put out Svarim on Gittin. He's written articles in Maria and other places about Gittin. And one of the topics is about forced Gittin. He put out a whole sefer for Eitzar Paiskim on the topic. So this topic, he also made discoveries of different documents about it, and he published it in the Maria. So even only today, in the past few years, is one could even begin to understand what happened. But these Svarim are rare. So Baruch Hashem, there's a Machon called Zichron Aaron. They've published dozens of Tshuva Svarim from the 1600s, 1500s, 1600s, and onwards, and all other types of Svarim. So they got a hold of these rare Svarim, published them, and published some of the newer documents about them. So we have to have Meir the Gakar Satay for them. However, there's one minor complaint that I have is that they published the Svarim, they played around with the order without telling you exactly. So it's not always clear which side are you reading. And it's very important in this story. You need to know, am I following the Tamari side or the Ventoruzzo side? So, but they sort of messed it up a little, which they should have just put a page in the beginning and said what exactly that they're trying to do. They're trying to help you, but sometimes when you're trying to help, it gets messed up. Okay, anyway, now, so that's some of the background, how we know about the story. Lamashal, Ramatisyo Strashon, when he talks about the way I first was introduced even to this controversy, he has a footnote listing a bunch of controversies, and he's talking starting about an earlier controversy in Italy, also relating to Kedushin, Gittin, all these types of things, and then he throws in a footnote this controversy. He says something about it. So I always knew there's such a thing. And then he says there's another controversy in Italy that took place around these years about mikvahs that also generated a bunch of svarim. And he talks about Bechlal, Machlokes, and all these types of things. Ramatzio has a beautiful piece about it. But the point is, the way he sets it up is there were a lot of times Machlokes, but the Gedolim involved, they were completely l'shem shamayim. The problem is, as we learned this topic, is that not always did everyone have all the whole story in front of them. This people are that, let's say it's taking place in Italy, and then we write to Tzvas. There's no telephones, there's no conversations. It's a very far place to communicate. A letter, it takes a very long time to piece together the exact story. And we'll see, Lamashal the Mabit, when he's talking about it, he sees some of the Svarim, so he comes out very sharp on one side, and if he would have known different aspects, it's possible he would have come out differently. Okay, anyway, the point is that we have today is probably one of the first times in the past few years that one could properly learn through the sugya, and that's what we're trying to do today, just to give a little taste of some of the issues. So going back to our story, so number one is Cherem is a very important thing, and he's put in Cherem. Fine. Who's put in Cherem? To remind us, Shmuel the Chassan. He's put in Cherem because he doesn't give the get based on the sugya and ksuvas. Now, in 1565, Rav Shmuel Katzenellenbogen, who's the son of the Marami Padua, because the Marami Padua dies literally in the middle of this discussion, in the middle of this fight, and he takes over. He gets involved with his bezin, and he says you have 5 days. If you don't give a get within 5 days, you're in trouble. Anyway, the kitzer, a get is given. So you think, okay, fast forward 1565, the story's over. It didn't even begin. What happens is, right afterwards, he says that he didn't mean to give the get. He was forced to give the get. And this it becomes La Yehudim Ha'Yisraira, and literally, it goes crazy from there on. Okay, now, we have to backtrack for a drop, and that is like this. Something's very funny. If you're looking at the dates, you see 1560 is the chasana, so to speak. The chasana, I don't mean that it is actual chasana, but the erison, whatever you want to call it. And then only in 1564 is there a sort of a discussion about a get. What's going on from 1560 to 1564? And none of the Svarim, both sides of the Svarim, don't talk, don't say anything. They're quiet. So comes along Ephraim Kuffer and he says, buddy, let me tell you something. There's a Tshuvas HaRamah. And in the Tshuvas HaRamah, as I said, this is a period of time that there's a lot of controversy. So Maram Padua, who's the person who we just said, he's the one who starts saying you have to bring the get, is in the middle of a fight with none other than who? Yosef Tamari. A vicious fight. And you know what happens in the fight? He puts Tamari into Cherem. So, and we learn all about this. How do we learn all about this? We don't need any historians. We don't need any academics. We have Tshuvas Ramah. The Maram Padua writes a langa tshuva to the Ramah, his cousin, his relative. It's a whole different story about it. Explaining why he's putting him Cherem, dealing with all inyanim of Hilchos Cherem, and he's saying, fascinating, a long tshuva, not a one-line tshuva that we have and we're deducing, we're making deductions. We're talking about, it's almost 10-page tshuva, which is a pretty big tshuva for such a thing. The Ramah, he wants to hear if the Ramah agrees with him. Ramah says, I agree with you. And Ramah at the end of the tshuva says, a lashon, that this Reifa, they say the whole time who they're referring to, it's mamish terrible. Has he come out against the goyin oilam zakein ben shmeinim legvura shekol adam nikrom? It's like a talmidim. The kitzer yecherim is a cherim. He's saying about the Maram Padua. He was a zaken mufak at the time. And now, what's that fight about? It's not about this. It's a money fight. It deals with another controversy. As I said, there was tons of fights going on in Italy then, and I'm not going into that fight. But my point is, only after 1564 does he get out of the Cherem and Kilo de Shalom. So now he could go to the Maram Padua and say, my daughter, there's a story, the saga, could you come with the Eitzah for the thing? Okay, but this is a fascinating piece that not necessarily does everyone put together, because this is a tshuva. Fine. Now, what's interesting is this is a tshuva that's being written in the late 1550s. So everywhere, and all the discussions over here is they're quoting who? The Beis Yosef. When's the Beis Yosef published? Beis Yosef's only published 10 years before. And you see already the Meirdik impact. The Ramah is handling him, the Maram Padua is handling him. The Mabit, all the Gedolim, when they're talking in this sugya, we're going to see also in the Chuvas, the Beis Yosef this, Beis Yosef that, and handling. So you see right away the power of the Beis Yosef right away, the Sefer becomes very accepted. Okay, that's a side point. Anyway, so why does he stop the get? That's the question. What's going on over here? So this is obviously where the meat and potatoes lies, which is well above my pay grade, which is a forced get, the sugyas in this, which is Nageya Ad Hayoim. As I said, this Rabbi Gertner has a whole book about it, and there's dozens of articles about it, a very sensitive topic. But here we have an early tshuva about this thing. So when you look through the documents that I said, the Svarim published on both sides, so there's different tshuvas about this. So number one is there's a tshuva from a Yid. It says here, the Gain Rav Yosef Trivush. Now, again, I said there's 50 Gedolim in this period of time that are floating around, and he has a long tshuva saying why he was forced, and it's not a problem, and it's not a get. Mamish, a 14-page tshuva on the sugya. Mamish, unbelievable to see the Gemaras that are being floating around to show that the Bezdin, gave a get and whatever. It's not a get, it was a forced get, etc., etc. Now, don't think that that's the only sheet over here. There's dozens of chuvas over here against it. So the kitzur, you could see kala Torah kula, the Hainu Masechtas Gittin, being thrown at you from every possible way with the Rishayim and whatever they had at that time. Handling lumdus and all different things is being discussed heavily in this thing. He's claiming that he was forced. He had no interest in giving the get. He really wanted to go through with the marriage. He wasn't in the greatest relationship with the shver. Okay, it happens sometimes. They say now. The point is that what is this true? So many of the Gedolim say, no, it's not. You can't do that. The get is a good get. Superstars were brought in, not only from Italy, as I said, and I'm going to quote a few brief Lashonis in a moment. Now, but it's not enough that he has a Yid. I just quoted this Rabbi Yosef Trivush. No one knows who he is. You need to get a big name, so to speak, to back you up in such a controversy in order to have something, otherwise, what is it? This young whippersnapper is going up against all the Gedolim of Italy. So we learn all of a sudden through the documents that a Yid, one of the Gedolei Hadar of Italy and Bechlal of the Jewish world at the time, who we today, most people never heard of him. What's his name? Rabbeinu Moshe Provensalio. He was one of the Gedolei Hadar of Italy at the time, and like I've mentioned in the past, a lot of times there could be someone that was mamish, one of the Gedolei Hadar of that kufa, and he's forgotten about. He wrote Chuvas, and he wrote Tyrus, and he was involved with every controversy going on in Italy. He's being brought in to get involved, and he's writing, but nothing is published of his kamat. So today, nothing, you don't know anything about him. But already, early 1900s, they start printing different Chuvas of his, and Baruch Hashem, Mechon Yerushalayim, in 1989, prints a massive Chuva Sefer of his. Incredible. You're seeing why this person was the Gadol Hadar, one of the Gedolei Hadar of the time. We're talking about someone that knew the Beis Yosef and the Ramah. These are people that are alive at the same time. So in Italy, he's one of those superstars. He's in connection with the Beis Yosef. But as I said, life is lebedik in those days. Sometimes he's good with the Beis Yosef, sometimes he's not. He's sometimes in Chayrim, not Chayrim. It's tummeling, tutzaching, unbelievable. But Lamashal, the Mari-Nayim, the famous controversial work Mari-Nayim, which certain Gedolim were very against, he's in Italy. He knows him well. He knows Reb Azariah and Adoimim well. He puts the Sefer, it makes problems for the Sefer. So, fine. But just understand, I'm going to quote you a klal. There's a lot of different svarim at the time. So they say, what's klali apsak? For in Italy, if it's brought down from Ramesha Provensalio, we go like that. I mean, say he was so accepted by the later dairis of Italian chachamim that he was considered a superstar, and that's why I'm saying it makes significant help for this Shmuel fellow that he was able to get this person on his side. Okay, now you have to understand, in this Tshuva Sefer, we get to see a glimpse, mamish, a fascinating person. We're not going to go into him at this time. His Talmud, the Baal Nefutzas Yehuda, gives a Ma'aridige Hesped on him. And just to mention one thing, because we have to say at least one thing about this Yid. As I said, the Tshuvas are mind-blowing. Unbelievable what's going on in the Tshuva Sefer. What, Lamashal, another controversy going on at this time, is about Kabbalah, the printing of the Zayar. Should it be printed? Shouldn't it be printed? Everyone's weighing in. And another controversy related to this is, should one wear tefillin on Chalamoid or not? So Mekubalim held not to wear tefillin on Chalamoid. So what do you think this Ramesha has to say about it? He says like this, based on the Gemara's, you're mechuyev to wear tefillin on Chalamoid. He says the following language, if I wouldn't have seen it inside, I would never believe it. He says, L'fi Kabbalas HaTalmud, yimei Chalamoid, hen keshar yimei chol inyan tefillin. Kol mi she'ein roitzel anicham, yesh levezdin, lasroi ulahakoisoi, ad she'teitzei nafshoi, kedei she'yekayim beis mitzvahs asei bezmanam, kedin kol mitzvahs asei, she'maken kol hamenei atzmoi mimenu b'shas chiyuvoi, ad she'yasena, oi ad she'teitzei nafshoi. Bekitzer, you got to wear the tefillin, otherwise you should get beaten on Chalamoid. This is obviously a very sharper thing, but this is what was yet another controversy going on in Italy at this time. Okay, Al Kapanim, his brother Reb David Provensalio, who we now know was one of the great Darshanim and Chashiv Talmid Chacham at that period of time, which also we knew nothing about him. 2 years ago, Professor Yaakov Spiegel publishes from manuscript a massive works on Masechtas Avos. Also, he's on the side of his brother, and some other Talmidim on the side, Talmid Chacham on the side of the brother. And the point is that the brother sides with this Shmuel, and it's, as he documents it out all over in these Chiburim, and he wrote a small Chibur also on this thing. I'm going to mention very briefly, because I'm trying to keep this short as sweet, as they say. So I'm going to mention just a few different quotes, and discuss a little bit about this to come to the conclusions. Okay, like this. Number one, I said that the Gedolim, not only in Italy, got involved. So there's a famous Tshuva Sefer, the Mabit. Mabit, one of the Gedolei Hadar, Bar Plukta of the Beis Yosef, one of the Mamish, unbelievable Yid. He gets this question and he says he's Mamish, again, he's on the side of Yosef Tamari. Fine. And you see what he had was the documents that Tamari and also this Reb Shmuel published. Fine. He says he has no idea how anyone could say the get is not a good get. So to the Marishdam, vicious tshuva, pages and pages, something like 15, 16 pages, 2 tshuvas devoted to the topic. Also, the get is a good get. So too his contemporary, the Divrei Rivos. These are all Gedolim, which maybe one day we'll try to elaborate more about who these are. So what happens is, the Radvaz, another one of the Gedolei Hadar at this time. So not only do we have the Italian Gedolim, I would say a large percentage, most of the percentage of the Talmidei Chachamim in Italy are siding like Yosef Tamari. So even though we made him sound like a little whatever with the, not kosher v'yosher with the Ramah, but as I said, Cherims came and went in those days. So the point is that a lot of the Gedolim were on the side. Most of the Gedolim seem to have been on the side of that the get is a good get. He was forced. No, and they deal with that at length. That it's not considered, what he's saying is not true, and it's not a problem. Now, the point is that it gets to the Bezdin of who? The Beis Yosef. And from what we're able to tell, the Beis Yosef's Bezdin does agree with that the get is not a get. Ramesha Provenzali, who reads through all the documents, who speaks with this Shmuel fellow a long time, and is familiar with all the people firsthand living in Italy, he feels very strong that this is not a good get. Okay, now.
Are you going to discuss a little bit why he's claiming it was a forced get?
No, I'm not. It's way too complicated to explain, because we have to first background is what the Gemaras and the Rambams and what the Psak Halacha is about it, and then we would have to see how it all plays out. It would end up being very technical. And I do have some Rahmanis on the audience, but that's part of what, and also it's a very complex sugya yoim, so I like to stay away from the things. I don't want to get myself in trouble. But what I will say is as follows: a few very brief points. Number one is like this. So Ramesha Provenzali, the Beis Yosef's Bezdin, it seems also sided like this fellow. How did this fight take place? I said there was Chabramim going on. There's another thing that's going on. It's called broadsides. I said that what happens is that besides for publishing Svarim, where Yosef Tamari publishes 1, Shmuel publishes 3 Svarim in a period of a year, where he gets all the Chuvas and explains everything, there's also Kol Kairis and Pachkavilim that go up. So in the olden days, and it still exists, there's something called a broadside. What's a broadside? So I refer to the book, The Writing of the Wall, a catalog of Judaica broadsides from the Valmadana Trust Library. So it gives an introduction. What's a broadside is basically a document, usually one side, which the idea was, that's how people found out about everything. You get a paper in shul that says there's a sale. That's a broadside. Now, the broadsides in those days was also if, let's say, something big is happening. So Shmuel paid for broadsides to be put up all over places in Italy that my shver, or supposed to be shver, came out against me, and he's making, and it's going lebedik. Now, what happens is, this is how people get a bad name. This is mamish the internet of those days. So this Shmuel put up a bunch of these broadsides. This is the modern day Pachkavilim, right? People think the Pachkavilim is only a thing in Yerushalayim. The answer is no. Way back, they were doing this technology based on, because the printing press was alive and well in those days. This is one way how they fought. So another way they fought, we mentioned already, was Haramim. Another way was It's called Bittul Hatamid. When you learn through these documents, you'll see that there's constantly being referred to Bittul Hatamid. What's Bittul Hatamid? So Bittul Hatamid means that in shul, again, they wanted to emphasize this person is in Chayrim. So they would stop. A lot of times they would do it right before the Kriyas HaTorah. People want to get going. They want to, let's say, during the week, Monday and Thursday, before the laning, Bittul Hatamid. I'm not moving to here. I'm not letting you begin laning until you give me money. Or I'm not moving here until you put this pliny into Chayrim. This is what was done in the Middle Ages. We have tons and tons of documentation about this. This is when people had tightness in little shtettlach. Also, this is what they would do. So this also, in these documents, we see this was also done on both sides. We'll go to different kehilas, to the big shuls, and it will be against the Gedolim and the Rabbanim and the people. Bekitzer, as I said, this is mamish tummeling and tutzaching at this period of time. Okay, now another factor that comes over here is, I said, arkais. Gaisha courts get involved. What's going on over here? So this is a tremendous topic in its own right, which again is way above my pay grade. It's a whole sugya that it's kedai from this sugya when we get to areas in Nezikin to learn more about it, what's behind it, because that also plays out in these sugyas. Is there ever a heter? And we see Lamashal, this Rav Katzenellenbeigen, who gave drushes, who's one of the gedolim against who's pro the get, who's against Ramesha Provenzali. He gives a whole drasha how terrible Yidden are going to Arkais. In the case of this Yosef Tamari, who he's siding with, he also went to Arkais ganz fine in the middle of this thing. Okay, anyway, another factor that comes in over here is there's a chayrim of Rabbeinu Tam. What does that mean? Rabbeinu Tam held that once a get is given, you cannot be ma'ar on the get. This is a chayrim Rabbeinu Tam. We have it from today. We have in the Sefer Yashav Rabbeinu Tam. The Paiskim knew about this. It's not clear exactly when it gets accepted, but by the time this generation, the Marik, the Ramah, they're all handling it. They're trying to understand it. When is it applicable? So basically, like this: if let's say Adam Gadol says that the get is not a good get and he doesn't know anything, that's the question: is that where Rabbeinu Tam says his rule? But the point is that even that, the Rabbeinu Tam's takana against people with using a get, coming out against the get after it gets given, the churva that it could happen, and when exactly Rabbeinu Tam meant it, would it apply to this case of this, where this Shmuel says that my get is not a get and I never intended to give her a get? So that also is a deal in the Paiskim over here. And certain Paiskim say that this Shmuel fellow is being over the chayim of Rabbeinu Tam, whereas others say no. If you understand when Rabbeinu Tam said it, then you understand the Marik, and you understand what the Ramah, how he learns it up. It's not so simple that it's a problem. Okay, one last Nakuda, which relates to Arkais, which relates to the Bezdin, which relates to how the whole thing was given. There's something called arbitrators in Halacha, which also relates to that in this story, that they were also involved, which also one has to understand the Bezdin process in Italy at the time, which Reuven Bumfield deals with at length in his book on this Tkufa. And the point is, it also plays out in the Paiskim. When they're handling the various chuvas, you have to understand the hilchus of how that works. So what I'm saying is like this, to sum it all up. This was a get that was given finally after it's given, after all the back and forth. Tons and tons of documentation. And a lot of side topics come up in the sugya that play out, that needs to be clarified properly, needs to be understood. When Milashal this Rabbeinu Tam is one sugya. The story of a foresket is another sugya that plays out over here. And as I listed out a few others of the different hilchos haget, I watered it down, taking away not to make it as concise without getting into the nitty gritty, because it's very complex. But the point is, this get at that time caused unbelievable controversy. We don't even know the end of the story, what happened with all the characters. But what we do know is that today we're able to learn from the materials in this sugya to help us understand certain aspects in Gittin and give us a little bit, some, as they say, milsa de when you're learning Gittin, see that it came up, it comes up Keseder, and we'll see that with the future episodes also, Mir Tzashem. This is what took place in the 1560s in Italy.
Amazing. I think the biggest takeaway for me is that it can be something that happens from two random people, where you have so many gedolim that are involved, and you could not know what's going on, and then you learn little bits and pieces to try to piece it together. And you can learn so much today, like you said, much more in the sugya, in the actual sugya, but the story is a fascinating one. Thank you very much. You want to quickly turn around and pull out a sefer to introduce?
Yeah, 1 second. Let's pull out one sefer. Okay. Okay, so this sefer is called Shma B'ni, Volume 1. It looks like this. Fine. What is it? It's a sefer, Volume 1, 766 pages and an index. Published by who? A Yid, Rabbi Yamin Lubin, who's the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshiva's Torah's Chaim in Miami. Chafetz Chaim, a tremendous Talmud of the Chafetz Chaim Yeshivas, Rosh Yeshivas of Chafetz Chaim. Anyway, this is a sefer, not your typical sefer. It's called Anhagais V'Adrachais from the Gaonim, Reb Meir Chadash, Reb Dov Katz, Reb Ben-Zion Brook, Reb Mordechai Zuckerman, Reb Zedel Epstein, Reb Yosef Cohen, and Reb Eliezer Plachinsky. Basically, when he was in Eretz Yisrael over the years, way back before he became Rosh Yeshiva, he would speak to all these different Gedolim about all the types of questions that people find interesting, especially questions about Musar, the Slabotka method, all the Kel method, and he would speak to all these different Gedolim, and he would get a lot of information from them. This recently just Mamish came out a few weeks ago, and full of hundreds of footnotes of materials that he had, that he heard from his Rosh Yeshivas, full of fascinating people that want to have a glimpse from first-hand sources, from great Gedolim, who some of them even who had messiahs from Europe about the yeshiva world, especially relating with Musar. This is a fascinating book. You meet about Gedolim, with the Beis Halevi, the Chazon Ish, all different things from some of the people Talmid in the Chazon Ish, but you get to see a lot about Europe, Musar, and all different Das Torah and Yanim in this work. I found it fascinating. I obviously did not go through the whole thing at this time, but it just came out.
Thank you very much. And if Eliezer Brot is recommending a book that came out within the last few weeks, it must be a fascinating book. Once again, thank you very, very much to the sponsor, L'Zchus Refuah Shalema Victor Binyamin Ben Perel Frumit. We are looking forward. This is the first of the 4 controversies we're going to talk about. Looking forward to the next 3. Have a wonderful day.